I set the table for a celebration, then waited in silence. Mother's Day had always been a day of hope for me, a day when I allowed myself to believe that all the years of sacrifice, all the sleepless nights and quiet prayers would be remembered. I woke up early, as I always did, and moved through the house with a sense of anticipation. I ironed the good tablecloth, the one I only used for special occasions. I polished the silverware, arranged the plates, and placed a small vase of fresh flowers in the center of the table. The chicken was in the oven, the potatoes peeled, the salad ready. I even baked a chocolate cake, just like I used to when my children were small and their laughter filled every corner of the house. As the clock ticked toward noon, I checked my phone for messages. The day before, I had called both Tanisha and Malik, my daughter and son. They had promised to come for brunch. "Yes, Mama, of course we'll be there," Tanisha had said, her voice hurried but warm. Malik had been more direct. "Yeah, Ma, we're coming, don't worry about it." I had clung to those words, letting them fill the empty spaces in my heart. I imagined the hugs, the stories, the simple joy of being together as a family. But as the hours passed, hope began to fade. At noon, the table was still empty. By 12:30, I started to feel that familiar knot in my stomach. At 1:00, the chicken was ready, its aroma filling the house, but there was no one to eat it. I sat down at the table, looking at the empty plates, the folded napkins, the flowers already starting to wilt. I tried to call Tanisha, no answer. Malik's phone went straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again, but the silence on the other end of the line was louder than any words. Outside, I could hear the sounds of other families celebrating. Children laughing, mothers being hugged, the distant echo of music and joy. I watched from the window as neighbors walked by with bouquets of flowers, gifts wrapped in shiny paper, and arms full of love. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were, if they realized how quickly those moments could slip away. By late afternoon, I gave up waiting. I put the food in the fridge, folded the linens, and threw away the flowers. I sat on the sofa, the house growing darker as the sun set, and let the tears come. They were not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet, steady tears that came from a place deep inside, a place where hope and disappointment had lived side by side for too long. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the day in my mind. I wondered if I had done something wrong, if I had failed as a mother, if I was simply no longer needed. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I could not lift. I realized that love, no matter how deep, does not guarantee remembrance. Sometimes, the people you give everything to are the ones who forget you the fastest. And so I set the table for a celebration, then waited in silence, learning that sometimes the greatest heartbreak comes not from what is said, but from what is left unsaid. I gave them everything. How did I become invisible? That question echoed in my mind as I sat alone on Mother's Day, the house silent except for the ticking of the clock. My life, like so many mothers, was a story of sacrifice written in small, everyday acts. I was never the kind of woman who dreamed of riches or fame. My dreams were simple: a safe home, healthy children, and a family that would always stand together, no matter what storms came our way. I remember the early years, when my husband and I first started our life together in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and leaky pipes. We had little money, but we had each other and the hope that things would get better. When Tanisha was born, I felt a joy so fierce it frightened me. I poured all my love into her, learning to braid her hair, sew her dresses, and soothe her fevers with gentle hands. Malik came 2 years later, a bundle of energy and laughter who filled our home with noise and chaos. My husband worked long hours, and I took on sewing jobs and tutoring to help make ends meet. Every rupee I earned went to school fees, new shoes, and the little treats that made my children smile. When my husband died suddenly, the world shifted beneath my feet. I was left alone with 2 young children and a mountain of bills. There was no time for grief. I became both mother and father, waking before dawn to cook breakfast, pack lunches, and walk Tanisha and Malik to school. I worked late into the night, sewing by candlelight, my fingers raw and my eyes heavy with exhaustion. I never let my children see my fear. I wanted them to feel safe, to believe that the world was still full of possibilities. As they grew, I made every sacrifice I could. I skipped meals so they could eat well, wore old clothes so they could have new ones, and never bought anything for myself unless it was absolutely necessary. I cheered at every school play, helped with every science project, and listened to every story about friends and teachers and dreams for the future. I taught them to be kind, to work hard, and to never forget where they came from. I believed that if I gave them everything, they would always remember the love that built their lives. But as the years passed, I began to notice small changes. Tanisha became more independent, spending time with friends and talking less to me. Malik grew quiet, retreating into his own world of music and video games. I told myself it was normal, that children grow up and pull away, but the distance hurt more than I cared to admit. I tried to hold on, organizing family dinners, sending messages, and reaching out whenever I could. Sometimes they responded, but more often there was only silence. I watched as they built their own lives, found jobs, and moved into new apartments. I was proud of their success, but I missed the days when they needed me. I missed the laughter, the chaos, the sense of being at the center of their world. I tried to remind myself that this was what I had worked for, to give them the freedom to chase their dreams. But in the quiet moments, I wondered if I had given too much, if I had made myself so small in their lives that I had disappeared altogether. The hardest part was realizing that my sacrifices had become invisible. The meals cooked, the clothes washed, the nights spent worrying over fevers and heartbreaks, all of it faded into the background of their busy lives. They remembered birthdays and holidays, but only as obligations, not as celebrations. They called when they needed something, but rarely just to talk. I became the person they turned to for help, not for love. Still, I held on to hope. I believed that one day they would look back and see all that I had done, that they would understand the depth of a mother's love. I dreamed of the day when they would come home, not out of duty, but out of desire, to sit at my table, to share stories, to laugh and remember. I never imagined that Mother's Day would become a day of waiting, a day when I would set the table for a celebration and find myself alone. Now, as I look back on a lifetime of giving, I am forced to confront a painful truth. Love does not always guarantee gratitude, and sacrifice does not always earn remembrance. I gave them everything, my time, my energy, my dreams. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible, a shadow in the home I built. And as I sat in the silence of that forgotten day, I realized that it was time to find myself again, to remember that my worth was not defined by what I gave, but by who I am. Every hour, hope faded a little more. I sat at the table, the clock ticking louder with each passing minute, and tried to fill the silence with memories. In the morning, I had been so sure they would come. I replayed the phone calls from the day before, the promises that echoed in my mind. Yes, Mama, we'll be there. I set out the good china, arranged the flowers, and checked the oven one last time. The house was spotless, the food was ready, and my heart was open, waiting for the sound of the doorbell and the laughter of my children. As noon passed, I tried to distract myself by tidying up the living room, straightening the cushions, and dusting the family photos on the wall. Each picture told a story: Tanisha's first day of school, Malik's graduation, birthdays and holidays when the house was full of life. I remembered the mothers' days when they were little, how they would wake me with handmade cards and clumsy bouquets of wildflowers. Their faces would light up as they presented their gifts, and I would hug them close, feeling like the luckiest mother in the world. But those days felt like another lifetime. Now the house was quiet, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. I checked my phone again, no new messages. I tried to call Tanisha, but it went to voicemail. Malik's phone rang and rang before cutting off. I told myself they were just running late, caught up in traffic or last-minute errands. But as the hours dragged on, my confidence began to waver. I sat by the window, watching the world go by. I saw other families walking down the street, mothers with children in tow, arms full of flowers and gifts. I wondered if they knew how precious those moments were, if they realized how quickly time could slip away. I thought about the small joys I used to take for granted, the sound of my children's laughter, the warmth of their hugs, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal together. I missed those days more than I could say. By mid-afternoon, the food was cold, the flowers had wilted, and the sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across the empty table. I tried to keep busy, reheating the chicken, rearranging the napkins, but my heart wasn't in it. Every hour that passed made the silence feel heavier, the distance between us wider. I wondered if they had forgotten, or if they simply didn't care. I tried to remember the last time we had all sat together, really talked, really listened. It felt like a memory from someone else's life. As evening approached, I gave up waiting. I put the food away, folded the linens, and turned off the lights in the dining room. I sat on the sofa, wrapped in a shawl, and let the memories wash over me. I remembered the mothers' days when they were teenagers, how they would grumble about having to wake up early or help with chores, but still managed to make me feel special. I remembered the first year after my husband died, when Tanisha and Malik tried so hard to fill the void, bringing me breakfast in bed and promising to always take care of me. But promises fade, and children grow up. The small joys of the past had been replaced by the coldness of the present, a text message instead of a visit, a quick call instead of a conversation, a request for money instead of a gift. I realized that the signs had been there all along, the missed birthdays, the forgotten anniversaries, the way they only called when they needed something. I had ignored them, clinging to the hope that things would get better, that my love would be enough to bring them back. As night fell, I sat in the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of the house. I thought about all the years I had spent giving, loving, and waiting. I wondered if they would ever understand what it meant to be a mother, to give everything and ask for nothing in return. I wondered if I would ever feel that warmth again, or if the coldness of this day would become the new normal. Every hour, hope faded a little more, and I realized that sometimes the hardest part of being a mother is learning to let go. They forgot my day, but remembered my wallet. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. For a moment, my heart leapt with hope. Maybe they'd remembered after all. Maybe they'd come to surprise me, to make up for the long, lonely hours I'd spent waiting. I smoothed my hair, wiped my eyes, and hurried to the door, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and longing. Tanisha was the first to step inside, her perfume lingering in the air, her dress crisp and her makeup perfect. Malik followed, his shirt untucked, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something. They both smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a stranger, not your mother. "Hey, Mama," Tanisha said, glancing at her phone. "We just thought we'd stop by." Malik nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "How was your day, Ma?" I wanted to tell them the truth, that my day had been long and empty, that I had waited for them, that I had set the table and cooked their favorite meal, that I had missed them more than I could say. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "It was fine. I'm glad you're here." I waited for them to notice the untouched food, the wilted flowers, the effort I had made. But their eyes slid past the table, past the evidence of my hope, and settled on the sofa. There was an awkward silence, the kind that fills a room when people have come for a reason they're ashamed to admit. Tanisha sat down, crossing her legs and tapping her phone. Malik remained standing, shifting from foot to foot. Finally, Tanisha broke the silence. "Mama, we need to talk about something important." Malik moved closer, his voice low and urgent. "Yeah, Ma, we have a problem. We need your help." I felt a familiar sinking in my chest. I knew what was coming, but I let them speak. Tanisha explained that her credit card bill was overdue, that she'd had some unexpected expenses. Malik said his rent was late, that he was behind on payments and needed a little help to get back on track. "It's just this month, Mama," Tanisha said, her eyes pleading. "We'll pay you back, I promise." Malik nodded. "It's only 3,000. You always help us out." I looked at them, my children, the ones I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. I saw the exhaustion in their faces, the stress of adult life, the weight of their own responsibilities. But I also saw something else, a sense of entitlement, a belief that I would always be there to bail them out, to give without question, to put their needs above my own. I realized with a sharp ache that I was not here to be celebrated, but to be used. The conversation was raw and painful. I asked them if they remembered what day it was. Tanisha looked confused. "Sunday," Malik shrugged. "Why, Ma?" I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "It's Mother's Day. I waited for you all day. I cooked your favorite meal. I set the table. I hoped you would come." For a moment they were silent, the truth hanging heavy in the air. Then Tanisha laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Oh, Mama, you know how busy we are. We meant to come earlier, but things got complicated." Malik looked away, his cheeks flushed. "Sorry, Ma, we had a lot going on." I nodded, the disappointment settling into my bones. "I understand. Life is busy, but it hurts to be forgotten. It hurts to know that the only time you remember me is when you need something." The words hung between us, sharp and undeniable. Tanisha tried to change the subject, but I held my ground. I have always been here for you. I have given you everything I had, even when I had nothing left for myself. But I am not just a wallet. I am your mother. Malik shifted uncomfortably. We know, Ma, we appreciate you. But the words felt empty, a formality spoken out of habit rather than love. As they left, I handed them the money they asked for, but something inside me had changed. I realized that love is not a transaction, that presence is not the same as use. I watched them drive away, their laughter fading into the night, and I knew that I could no longer measure my worth by what I gave. That night, I sat alone at the table, the food cold and untouched, and made a promise to myself. I would not let my love be taken for granted again. The day they forgot me, but remembered my wallet, was the day I began to remember myself. When you lose your family, you lose your anchor. In the days after Mother's Day, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was no longer just the absence of voices. It was a heavy, living thing that pressed in on me from every side. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, straightening cushions, folding linens, and putting away dishes that no one had used. The table, once the center of our family life, now seemed like a stage set for a play that would never be performed again. Loneliness crept into every corner. I tried to distract myself with chores, with television, with the endless scroll of my phone, but nothing could fill the void left by my children's absence. I found myself replaying the events of that night over and over, searching for some sign that things could have been different. Was it something I said? Was I too demanding, too soft, too much of a burden? The questions circled endlessly, each one cutting a little deeper than the last. Friends and neighbors noticed the change in me. Some reached out with gentle sympathy, inviting me for tea or offering to help with errands. Their kindness warmed me, but it also made me feel exposed, as if my pain were on display for the whole world to see. Others were less kind, whispering behind my back, speculating about what I must have done to drive my own children away. Their judgment stung, adding shame to the loneliness I already carried. I tried to confide in a few close friends, but even their well-meaning advice felt hollow. They'll come around, they said. All children go through phases. But I knew this was different. This wasn't a phase, it was a fracture, a break in the foundation of my life. I began to question my worth, to wonder if I had failed as a mother. If I was somehow to blame for the distance that had grown between us. I replayed every decision, every argument, every moment of anger or impatience, searching for the mistake that had cost me my family. Anger simmered beneath the surface, mingling with the shame and sadness. I was angry at my children for their words, at myself for not seeing the signs sooner, at a world that seemed to value independence over loyalty, that taught children to chase their own dreams at the expense of those who raised them. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make someone, anyone, understand the depth of my hurt. Yet even in my isolation, I found small moments of comfort. A neighbor's child brought me flowers from the garden. An old friend sent a letter, reminding me of the strength I had shown in the past. I realized that while I had lost my anchor, I was not completely adrift. There were still people who cared, still connections that could be rebuilt, still hope for a different kind of family, one built not on obligation, but on choice and mutual respect. As I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I began to understand that my worth was not defined by my children's approval or anyone else's judgment. I was more than the roles I had played, more than the sacrifices I had made. I was a woman who had loved deeply, who had given everything, and who still had the strength to start again. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I was determined to find my way, no longer anchored by the past, but guided by the hope of a new beginning. I started to reach out, not just to old friends, but to new faces in the community. I joined a local women's group, where I found others who had faced similar struggles. We shared our stories, our pain, and our hopes for the future. In their company, I found a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. We were a patchwork family, stitched together by empathy and understanding, stronger for our differences and our shared resilience. Slowly, the isolation began to lift. I learned to enjoy my own company, to find joy in small victories. A day spent in the garden, a meal cooked just for myself, a walk in the park where I could breathe and remember who I was. I realized that being alone did not mean being lost. It meant having the freedom to rediscover myself, to build a life that was truly my own. When you lose your family, you lose your anchor. But sometimes, being adrift is the only way to find a new direction. And as I began to chart my own course, I discovered that the world was still full of possibilities and that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The day I stopped waiting for them was the day I found myself. It didn't happen in a single, dramatic moment, but in a series of quiet realizations that slowly gathered strength. For weeks after Mother's Day, I moved through my life as if underwater, every step heavy, every breath thick with disappointment. I replayed the night my children came only to ask for money, the way their eyes slid past the table I'd set, the way their words made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I waited for an apology, for a call, for some sign that they understood the pain they'd caused. But the phone stayed silent, and the days stretched on, empty and unchanging. One morning, as I sat by the window watching the world wake up, I realized I was tired of waiting. Tired of hopping for something that might never come. Tired of measuring my worth by the attention or the absence of others. I looked around my home, at the photos on the wall, the flowers I'd bought for myself, the books I'd been meaning to read. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself what I wanted, not what I could do for someone else. That question was the beginning of everything. I started small, making choices just for me. I cooked meals I loved, even if no one else was there to share them. I took long walks in the park, letting the sun warm my face and the breeze clear my mind. I bought a new dress, not for a special occasion, but because it made me feel beautiful. Each act of self-care was a quiet rebellion against the years I'd spent putting everyone else first. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with, women who had once been my confidants before life and distance pulled us apart. We met for tea, shared stories, and laughed about the things that used to worry us. I joined a local community group, where I met people from all walks of life, widows, single mothers, women who had faced their own heartbreaks and come out stronger. In their company, I found a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. We supported each other, celebrated each other's victories, and offered comfort on the hard days. As I built new connections, I also began to rediscover old passions. I dusted off my sewing machine and started making quilts for the local shelter. I volunteered at the library, reading stories to children whose parents were too busy to bring them. I planted a small garden in my backyard, watching with pride as the first shoots of green pushed through the soil. Each new experience was a reminder that life could still surprise me, that happiness could bloom in the most unexpected places. Forgiveness was the hardest lesson of all. For a long time, I held on to anger and disappointment, replaying my children's words and my own regrets. But as I built my new life, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about freeing myself from the weight of the past. I learned to forgive my children, not because they had asked for it, but because I refused to let their choices dictate my happiness. I forgave myself, too, for the mistakes I had made, for the times I had stayed silent when I should have spoken, for loving so deeply that I lost sight of my own needs. With forgiveness came a new sense of value. I stopped measuring my worth by my role as a mother or by anyone else's approval. I discovered that I was enough, just as I was. I found joy in my own company, in the quiet mornings spent with a cup of tea and a good book, in the satisfaction of a garden well tended, in the laughter shared with friends who saw me for who I truly was. I realized that my life was not over because one chapter had ended. In fact, a new story was just beginning. Old wounds didn't disappear, but they faded, replaced by the scars of survival and the pride of having rebuilt my life from the ground up. I learned to cherish the memories of happier times without letting them hold me back. I kept photos of my children on the mantle, not as a shrine to what was lost, but as a reminder of the love that had once been real. I sent birthday cards and holiday wishes, not expecting a reply, but hoping that one day, the lines of communication might reopen. In the meantime, I poured my energy into the relationships that nourished me. I became a mentor to younger women at the community center, sharing my story and encouraging them to find their own strength. I organized potlucks and movie nights, turning my small apartment into a haven of warmth and laughter. I reached out to neighbors, offering help when I could and accepting it when I needed it. Slowly, the isolation that had once threatened to consume me was replaced by a vibrant network of support. The greatest gift of this new life was the realization that family is not just about blood. It's about the people who show up, who listen, who care. It's about the bonds we choose to nurture, the kindness we give and receive, the love that grows in unexpected places. Sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. I found sisters, daughters, and friends in the most unlikely corners of my world, and together, we built something beautiful out of brokenness. Looking back, I see that loss and growth are two sides of the same coin. The pain of being left behind made space for new beginnings, for deeper connections, for a life that was truly my own. I am no longer defined by what I have lost, but by what I have found: strength, joy, and the courage to keep moving forward. My story is not one of abandonment, but of resilience and renewal. And as I look around at the family I have chosen, I know that I am exactly where I am meant to be. The day I stopped waiting for them was the day I found myself. If you only remember my wallet, you'll have to learn to live without it. That thought echoed in my mind as I prepared for the conversation I had avoided for years. I had spent a lifetime giving my time, my energy, my love, and yes, my money, believing that one day my children would see me as more than a source of support. But after the heartbreak of Mother's Day, after the long days of silence and the slow rebuilding of my own life, I knew it was time to speak. Not with anger, but with the quiet strength that comes from finally knowing your own worth. I invited Tanisha and Malik over for tea, choosing a day when I knew they would be free. I set the table simply, no special occasion, no hidden expectations. When they arrived, they seemed surprised to see me so calm, so composed. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. I poured the tea, offered them cake, and waited until we were all seated before I began. "I want to talk to you both," I said, my voice steady. "Not as your mother, but as a woman who has spent her life loving you, supporting you, and hopping for your happiness. I need you to listen, not just to my words, but to the truth behind them." Tanisha looked at Malik, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Malik shifted in his seat, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous energy. I took a deep breath and continued. "I know you have your own lives now. I know you have families, jobs, and responsibilities. I am proud of the people you have become. But I cannot ignore the way things have changed between us. I cannot pretend that I am not hurt by the way you treat me." There was a long silence. I could see the discomfort on their faces, the urge to interrupt, to defend themselves. But I pressed on. "On Mother's Day, I waited for you. I cooked your favorite meal, set the table, and hoped you would come. You didn't. And when you finally arrived, it was not to celebrate, but to ask for money. That was the moment I realized that I had become invisible, not as a mother, but as a person." Tanisha's eyes filled with tears. "Mama, we didn't mean to hurt you. Things have been hard, we needed help." I nodded, my heart aching with both love and disappointment. "I understand that life is difficult. I have always tried to help you, to give you what you needed. But I am not just a wallet. I am not just someone you turn to when you need something. I am your mother, and I deserve respect." Malik looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're sorry, Ma. We took you for granted." I reached across the table and took their hands in mine. "I am willing to forgive, but things have to change. From now on, there will be boundaries. I will no longer give money just because you ask. If you need help, we will talk about it honestly, and you will have to show me that you are making an effort to solve your own problems. I will not be made to feel guilty for saying no." The words felt strange in my mouth, but also liberating. For the first time, I was speaking not from a place of fear or obligation, but from self-respect. I saw the shock in their eyes, the realization that the rules had changed. "I also need you to understand that my love is not conditional on what I can give you. I will always be your mother, but I will not allow myself to be used. If you only remember my wallet, you'll have to learn to live without it." The confrontation was tense, emotions raw and close to the surface. Tanisha cried openly, apologizing for the times she had forgotten to call, for the moments she had put her own needs above mine. Malik admitted that he had relied on me too much, that he had never really thought about how his actions made me feel. We talked for hours, airing old grievances, sharing fears, and slowly, painfully, beginning to understand one another. It was not an easy conversation. There were moments when I wanted to retreat, to go back to the safety of silence. But I held my ground, knowing that this was the only way forward. I explained that boundaries were not about shutting them out, but about inviting them to see me as a person, not just a provider. I told them that I wanted a relationship built on mutual respect, not obligation. As the evening wore on, something shifted. The walls built by years of unspoken resentment began to crumble. We laughed about old memories, shared stories from our childhood, and found comfort in the simple act of being together. I realized that setting boundaries did not mean losing my family. It meant finding a new way to love them, one that honored both their needs and my own. By the end of the night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had spoken my truth, demanded respect, and reclaimed my place in the family. The journey was not over, and there would still be challenges ahead, but I knew that I had taken the first step toward healing. If you only remember my wallet, you'll have to learn to live without it. And in setting that boundary, I discovered that the greatest gift I could give myself and my children was the courage to say no. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. In the weeks after I set my boundaries, the house felt different, quieter, but also lighter, as if a heavy curtain had finally been lifted. My children moved through the rooms with a new awareness, their voices softer, their steps more careful. The old routines were gone, replaced by an uneasy quiet as we all tried to adjust to the new reality. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own choices and the freedom that came with them. At first, the change was awkward. My son avoided my gaze, unsure how to bridge the distance that had grown between us. My daughter, once so confident, now seemed hesitant, as if she was waiting for me to lash out or seek revenge. But I had no interest in punishment. I wanted peace, not power. I wanted to rebuild what could be saved and let go of what could not. I began by reclaiming small pieces of my life, cooking my favorite meals, tending the garden, and inviting old friends for tea. I filled the house with laughter and warmth, not out of spite, but out of a desire to heal. Some relationships were beyond repair. A few relatives, uncomfortable with the new balance, drifted away. Old friends who had only ever seen me as a caretaker struggled to understand my newfound independence. I let them go, grateful for the memories, but unwilling to return to a life of silent sacrifice. In their place, I found new connections, women at the community center, neighbors who admired my courage, and even strangers who reached out after hearing my story. Together, we formed a small community of survivors, each of us learning to value ourselves in a world that often asks women to give until there is nothing left. With time, I discovered a sense of peace I had never known before. I no longer measured my worth by how much I could endure or how many problems I could solve for others. Instead, I learned to celebrate my own victories, no matter how small. A day spent reading in the sun, a meal cooked just for myself, a walk through the market where I bought flowers simply because they made me happy. I found joy in solitude, in the freedom to make my own choices, and in the knowledge that I had survived the worst and come out stronger. My home became a place of renewal rather than regret. I redecorated the living room, choosing colors and fabrics that reflected my own taste. I hung new curtains, planted a small garden, and filled the shelves with books I had always wanted to read. The house was still shared, but it was no longer a battleground. It was a space where I could breathe, dream, and grow. The greatest change, however, was within myself. I no longer feared being alone because I had learned to enjoy my own company. I no longer waited for others to validate my existence because I knew my own value. I forgave my children, not because they had earned it, but because I refused to let bitterness define my future. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift to them, but a gift to myself, a way to let go of the past and embrace the possibilities of tomorrow. As the seasons changed, so did I. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping other women find their voices and stand up for their rights. I shared my story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience and hope. I encouraged others to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to believe in their own strength. The more I gave, the more I received, a sense of purpose, a network of support, and the satisfaction of knowing that my pain had not been in vain. Looking back, I see that losing everything was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. I found myself in the ashes of my old life, and from those ashes I built something stronger, more beautiful, and entirely my own. The journey was hard and the scars remain, but they are a reminder of how far I have come. I am no longer defined by what I have lost, but by what I have gained: peace, independence, and a renewed sense of self-worth. And as I move forward, I do so with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to start again. My children, too, began to change. They saw me not as a resource to be tapped, but as a person with her own needs and dreams. Our conversations became more honest, our time together more meaningful. There were still moments of tension, but there was also laughter, forgiveness, and the slow rebuilding of trust. I realized that by choosing myself, I had given them permission to do the same, to take responsibility for their own lives, to learn from their mistakes, and to grow into the adults I always hoped they would become. Some relationships were left behind, but others were repaired, stronger for having been tested. I learned that growth often comes from loss, that new beginnings are born from old wounds. I am grateful for the lessons, for the strength I found in the darkness, and for the hope that now fills my days. My story is not one of defeat, but of transformation, a reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. Your worth is not defined by what you give, but by how you rise. As I look back on the winding road that brought me here, I see not just the pain and regret, but the wisdom and healing that grew from those wounds. For years, I believed that being a good mother meant giving everything: my time, my energy, my dreams, without ever asking for anything in return. I thought that love was measured by sacrifice, that silence was a sign of strength, and that my value depended on how much I could endure for the sake of my family. But life, in its harshest moments, taught me a different lesson: that boundaries are not walls, but bridges to healthier relationships, and that self-respect is the foundation of every true connection. Regret is a heavy burden, and for a long time I carried it everywhere. I regretted not speaking up sooner, not insisting on my place in the family, not teaching my children that kindness and respect are not optional. I regretted every moment I let myself be pushed aside, every time I swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. But pain, I have discovered, is also a teacher. It forced me to confront the truth about my relationships, to see clearly where love had turned into obligation, and where giving had become enabling. I learned that it is not selfish to set boundaries, to say no, to demand respect. In fact, it is the only way to ensure that love remains a gift, not a burden. Healing began the day I chose to value myself. It was not easy. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the memories of laughter and togetherness haunted me like ghosts. But slowly, I learned to forgive, not just my family, but myself. I forgave myself for believing that my worth depended on others, for staying silent when I should have spoken, for loving so much that I forgot to love myself. Forgiveness was the key that unlocked the door to my own freedom. The most important lesson I learned is that boundaries are not about shutting people out, but about inviting the right people in. By setting limits, I taught my family how to treat me, and I taught myself that I deserved better. Respect is not about fear or control. It is about honesty, empathy, and mutual understanding. When I finally spoke up, I discovered a strength I never knew I had, and I found that others respected me more, not less, for standing my ground. To every mother listening who feels invisible, unappreciated, or afraid to speak her truth, I want you to know you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your feelings are valid. It is never too late to change the rules, to demand respect, and to reclaim your place in the world. The journey may be hard, and the cost may be high, but the reward is a life lived with dignity and self-worth. As I close this chapter, I do so with hope. Hope that my story will inspire others to find their own strength, to set their own boundaries, and to believe in their own value. Pain may be inevitable, but healing is possible. Regret may linger, but wisdom endures. And in the end, your worth is not defined by what you give, but by how you rise. Your story matters. Share it, and let's heal together. As I close this chapter of my journey, I want to reach out to every woman, every mother, and every person who has ever felt alone in their pain. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you've felt invisible in your own home, or struggled to find your voice in a world that too often asks women to stay silent. Maybe you've faced betrayal, loneliness, or the heartbreak of being pushed aside by those you love most. Or maybe you're just searching for a place where your experiences are understood and your feelings are honored. Auntie's living room is more than just a channel. It's a community built on empathy, courage, and the belief that every voice deserves to be heard. Here, we don't judge or shame. We listen, we support, and we learn from one another. I invite you to share your own journey in the comments below. Tell us about the moment you found your strength, the lesson you learned, or the boundary you set that changed your life. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs to take their first step toward healing. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe to Auntie's Living Room for more real-life stories, lessons, and conversations that matter. Like this video if you believe in the power of honesty and self-respect. Share it with a friend or family member who might need a reminder that they are not alone. And most importantly, keep the conversation going. Because every time we speak up, we make it easier for others to do the same. Together, we can create a space where silence is replaced by sharing, where isolation gives way to community, and where every woman, every mother, every daughter, and every friend knows that her story is valued. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this journey. Remember, your story matters. Share it and let's heal together. Let's build a world where no one has to face their struggles alone, and where every voice, no matter how quiet, can help change the rules for the better. Subscribe, comment, and join the conversation. This is Auntie's Living Room, and you are always welcome here.